Okay, well, my name is Arthur Pierre, and I am your host. Okay, background education, and in recent times, disaster management. Right, I have done work with men through Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic, and that was initiated. That work actually was initiated by Mr. Shane Joseph many moons ago. All right, and I am still at it. Okay, I think it's one of the longest running programs that the Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic has, and that would be Partnership for Peace, affectionately called Man to Man. All right, so that's me. Allow me to invite you to introduce yourself. I think, could I ask Mr. Leo Edwards or Dr. Leo Edwards to do that for us, please?
Thank you, Arthur. So I'm Leo. I'm originally from Willis in Grenada. I'm very proud to be from Willis. And I am a clinical therapist, a lecturer, and I work as well in a management health portfolio at a mental health hospital in Toronto. In terms of my education, I have a bachelor's and master's degree in social work and a PhD in social justice education. Currently, I work at a mental health hospital, like I mentioned, in a health equity portfolio. I also have a private practice where I see primarily racialized people, Black and brown men and women who are living with all kinds of mental health challenges. And in addition to that, I do some lecturing at a community college in applied research and social service theories. Yep, so that's who I am, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about mental health in the context of men.
Okay, welcome, Leo. Then I would move on to Mr. Shane Joseph.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pierre, and good night to everyone and to my esteemed colleagues who are here. It's good to be able to join you within this space. Like Dr. Leo, I am also a clinical social worker and psychotherapist. I work within two various portfolios within municipal government and also within the non-for-profit sector as it relates to managing and supporting members of the Black community and the BIPOC community in mental health and other challenges, and supporting a team of clinicians. I'm also in private practice, and I've been involved in international development work for a number of large entities and bodies in the areas of masculinity, men and men's challenges, looking at gender-based violence, among many others. And so I'm grateful to be here within this space to share and to learn as well.
All right, thank you, Shane, and welcome. And then we do have Dr. Francis Martin, and I would ask him to introduce himself.
Guys, good night. How is my audio?
Audio seems to be fine.
The audio is okay?
Yes, it is.
All right, I am Dr. Francis Martin. I'm stopped by the side of the road and trying to log on. There's a couple of things that I've done. I don't want to actually go through this, but I was the former senior medical officer of the Ministry of Health, the chief medical officer of the Ministry of Health, and permanent secretary of the Ministry of Health, and now into private practice. My focus is on community health, primary healthcare, preventative healthcare, and alternative healthcare, and that's really what my focus is.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. So let's get the ball rolling. We are in the middle, smack dab in the middle of a pandemic, COVID, and of course, we are all concerned about the life of our men folk. So, how is that really and truly the issue of COVID, the issue of men and their sexual health, and all of the things that COVID seemed to have brought to us? How are men faring? What are some of the issues that men are faced with in relation to COVID? I want us to zero in first and foremost on the medical issues. I don't know if Dr. Martin is available. I'm not seeing him up on my screen again. Oh, yes, he is there. So, Doc, could you just start the batting for us?
Hi, Arthur, are you able to see me?
Yes, I'm seeing you, and I'm hearing you loud and clear.
I know. Yeah, the issue of COVID and what's happening now to mental health is a big issue. I think that as the World Health Organization has indicated that in the year 2020, mental health is going to be, 2030 actually, mental health is going to be the biggest issue in the world. At that time, we didn't know that COVID was going to be present, but thankfully now we understand that COVID is going to be an issue, so we have an opportunity to deal with it before it actually happens. So mental health is a big issue, and especially for men, because there are some complications of COVID that has significant implications on men in particular that we need to discuss. So I suppose as we continue to discuss tonight, we're going to, kind of walk through how we're going to deal with it.
Okay. Let me get some of the psychological take on the matter. Leo?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to open. We know based on the data that men are more likely to complete suicide as opposed to women. And we know as well globally, almost 600,000 men die annually. That's one man every minute. We know as well that mental health refers to cognitive, behavioral, and emotional well-being. The ability to feel safe and to show up in ways that are quote unquote appropriate and normal. And with COVID-19, we know boys and men are experiencing increased rates of anxiety and depression, perhaps given the restriction in the ways boys and men cope. So most certainly, in following Dr. Martin's comment, I think the next pandemic would be a mental health one, given the intense ways men and boys are experiencing the impacts of this pandemic. And I think it's showing up in their daily activities. It is showing up in their relationships, and perhaps even as well in their physical health.
Okay, very well. Shane, over to you. How has that really and truly affected the relationship between men and their spouses and so? How has COVID really and truly impacted on the relational issues and on, more specifically, domestic violence?
Well, I think as Dr. Martin and Dr. Leo stated, the mental health situation that is now very much more present and evident in our society. It's not as though mental health was not there before, but certainly within this COVID and this pandemic, it has become a lot more evident and prevalent and very obvious in our face. And persons are now really seeing the effects of it from a physical, psychological, emotional, and otherwise. And that is now saying to us that the challenges are real and very evident. And as we link that and the correlation between the challenges of mental health, what persons or men are experiencing, we've seen in many circumstances that there's been an increase in domestic violence or intimate partner violence incidences, we have seen, and that is very evident because people are now within an environment where they are bound within the four walls. And as a result, people who are not able to manage their anger before, now you're in a place where you have to be within the household and inability to sort of access. So it's a whole combination of complex pieces. And we're seeing, sadly enough, that women and girls continue disproportionately to be the victims and who continue to experience violence at the hands of their partners. I think it is also interesting for us to understand that even as men struggled before in self-regulating, struggle with managing anger, struggle with identity, struggle with the issue of finding self and managing relationship dynamics, that is about power and control, managing the dynamics as it relates to healthy relationship and how it is that I can be a partner that is equal and celebrating the successes with their partners. We are seeing people who struggle with that before is now struggling in greater extent, and now violence is emerging or is becoming one of the more prevalent pieces as it relates to how they are able to manage. And as a result, we're seeing in some cases, not only is it that people are dying from COVID, but we are seeing that people are now in situations of both homicide and suicide. So I think it is deep, it is real, and we must get to the root cause, which I have explored a while ago about the power and control pieces and how it is that COVID is linked to that.
Very well, very well. Now, the other thing now, we have identified the problem. We have seen the complexities that COVID has brought to the man. What can we do? What do you think needs to be done to really get around some of those kind of problems, those kind of psychosocial problems that men are faced with? I'm just throwing that out. Anybody could jump in.
Well, I think as you have stated, we have the need whereby we are trying to address the issue of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, and getting into a place whereby we begin not only to the point where people are now using violence, but there's a lot of preparatory pieces that need to happen even before pandemic, because the pandemic shows up or unveil the problem that has been hidden before. And so what we need to do, I will say, is one, we need to do a lot as it relates to educating men and boys, as it relates to finding nonviolent approaches and strategies to managing conflicts and challenges in relationships. We have to get into a place where we begin to challenge notions and ideologies and beliefs as to who is a man, how it is that a man becomes a man, what are the ideologies and perspectives that have been taught as it relates to who a man should be, and a lot of the taboo and the shame and those pieces around masculinity, and deconstruct those kind of toxic pieces. We must get into a place whereby we teach men and boys how to be able to understand respect for self. That is through accountability and ownership of behavior, recognizing violence is a choice, and recognizing that in the midst of the pandemic, we may have all sorts of emotions and challenges, but finding ways in which they are able to effectively, and I know it's difficult, to be able to manage those pieces. But one of the things that we must recognize is that if there was nothing done before, and if persons had the taboo about getting help before, imagine when a pandemic presents itself, we have just seen the very evidence of what has been hidden.
So go ahead,
Arthur, when it's okay, I can speak.
All right, I'll give you a cue, Doc. Just let me hear from Leo, and I'll cue you right in.
All right, so I'll be really, really brief. I think just to add to what Shen said, I think mental health, the way it shows up, can be very complex. And I think the issues that presents itself before boys and men and humanity globally is as well. So it's not a one cap fit all.
Of course.
Approach. I think some folks are experiencing stress and anxiety. Others are dealing with loss, grief, and healing. Others are experiencing stigma and prejudice. And then a couple of us as well are dealing with quarantine and isolation.
Right.
So a response must be one that is planned rather than reactive.
Right.
So what an individual is presenting with, an intervention or approach should be selected that meets that presenting concern. It will look very different for folks depending on preference and depending as well on access.
Right. Very good. Dr. Martin.
Arthur, I think Shane and to a certain extent Leo has spoken about the way of. I think Shane and Leo has spoken about the philosophical way of dealing with this. Right. This is the correct answer for the questions. It has always been the correct answer to the questions before, but you're asking, what can we do about it?
Correct.
At this stage, I don't need the philosophical answers because we've always knew what the philosophical answers are. What my issue is, how can we have, real, down-to-earth, workable,
practical
solutions practical solutions that can actually work, because the philosophy will always be correct. And to my mind, what I heard tonight is the philosophy of what should work. How can we make it work? To my mind, that's what matters most.
Okay, very well. Let me just paint a scenario here. All right, and this is something that actually happened to a gentleman. He's home with a wife, okay? He cannot go anywhere because it's locked down. Usually on a normal daily basis, he would come home late, 9, 10, 11, 12, depends on the day, depends on the activity. And now he is locked down 24/7 with a wife that he does not necessarily like too much. How do we get around that? What can we say to that gentleman? He does everything that he thinks he can do within the household to occupy himself, but you know, like in Grenada, he has a hot foot. He can't settle one place for too long, and that frustration, that anxiety, that everything seemed to be coming down on him like a ton of bricks. What do we say to that gentleman?
So that's a good question. Prior to responding, though, I reject the assertion that the response is philosophical. I was clear that responses must be connected to the presenting concerns. So it means then, for someone who is isolated, the gentleman that we're referring to, what might work for him may not work for someone else.
Right.
The fact is, mental health support and practical support to mental presentations must be subjective to people's experience. In the case of Grenada, where there isn't extensive resources, then it's important as a community, we have conversations about maybe indigenous ways of taking care of our mental health. For that man who is isolated, it might be connecting via WhatsApp with individuals. It might be for someone else stepping outside in their backyard and beating a pot or a drum. Mental health conversation and intervention becomes difficult because it is quite subjective. Philosophical or not, it must be reactive to people's presenting concerns.
Okay. Shane?
And I think as well too, that when we look at the issue, is that there isn't homogeneity as it relates to how this person and how the other person will present, because everyone is so different. And I think when we begin to look at not just the presenting piece of what is manifesting, but we get into doing the biopsychosocial pieces. What has been that experience of that person? What has been the environment, the social upbringing? Who has been present? When we look at all of the challenges, we find that some people are able to thrive and some people are not able to thrive. And so our response as therapists, you're hearing us saying that the presenting issues and the issues that emerges when a person manifests, whether it's inability to cope, whether it's stress, whether and those kinds of situation must be addressed based upon the individual. And one of the things that I would like to say is that we're seeing now that in Grenada, men in particular never really liked the idea, and men on a global never liked the idea of counseling, because this is not a man's thing. This is not a man and going for nobody to talk to him about his issues. That is very atypical. So as a result, if we recognize that this was what was happening before, and now we have a pandemic, then what we're seeing is a complexity of a compounded situation that was already pre-existing, and now we're saying, fix it. We're fixing the fact that he never talked before. He never socialized the way he did. He wasn't communicating with the person he never really wanted to be, because he could have gone to person A or person B. And now you're saying, don't go anyway. You need to socialize, you need to isolate, and I'm under a curfew.
Now,
do you see where the anger comes from?
Oh yes. Oh, yes.
Do you see where the violence results? Do we see that the pieces are wrong? What is happening? And we're talking now about somebody who say he can't get you rum or he can't get the pieces to go along. Let me tell you this. This is like having a pressure cooker on slow heat for a couple of days.
Wow. Wow, that's you paint that picture very well there. And now I want to shift from mental health just a little bit. Okay, and I want to look at the physical health of the individual. How is that affecting? How is COVID actually affecting our men folk physically in the country? Dr. Martin, what are the stats? What are they more affected than the females?
Yeah, what I'd like to say is that we need to go back to the science of what has happened, and the discussion has been quite rich, understanding, and really and truly, so much of what we have discussed so far is the reaction to how the human body reacts under stressful situations. Now, from a biological standpoint, this situation now is a situation where the human body creates a lot of cortisol, a lot of stress-related hormones in the brain, and cortisol is probably the biggest one of them. There is very clear evidence that increased cortisol causes the body to increase its cholesterol, increases hypertension, and increases in the human body. Not just stress, increased blood pressure and increased blood sugar, but it also increases the body's reaction to viral illnesses and so on. So the point is, at this stage, based on everything what's happening here, the man is going to experience a lot of infections, a lot of, stresses due to the COVID virus that's going on, a lot of stresses due to the whole societal issue that is ongoing right now. So it's a really difficult situation for them. And even if it is not COVID, it's going to be other things like other viral illnesses that is going to happen. So we are going to react in some way or the other to exactly what's going on. And to a certain extent, we as organizations have to think about not just the social impact, but also the physical and psychological impact that these people are going through. Over.
Doc, a very specific question to you. When you look at the number of cases of COVID in Grenada, right, number of positive cases, even the number of deaths, are the figures among men higher than those among women? Dr. Martin?
Apparently, where I'm not hearing you very well. Maybe you need to just repeat.
All right, so I'll repeat the question. I'm just asking in a very specific way, if as it relates to the amount of persons that have been infected by COVID, when we compare male and female, especially those who might have died or hospitalized? Are the numbers higher among men?
Well, I would have to speak with the hospital to find out what has happened. But what I can say to you historically, and even recently from the Chigvi and the Hurricane Ivan experience, it was very consistent that the men die at a higher rate than the women. Even from the psychological and mental health issues and adverse mental health reactions from the emergency room standpoint, men has always had a higher number than females when it comes to disasters and issues like that. So I will never be surprised if Dr. Donald is able to tell us that it was more men who die more than females, because historically we have seen that the men folk are the ones who suffer most from natural disasters or emotional disasters and other forms of chronic diseases.
Okay, very well. Now, one of the things I know, and it has been said time and time again, even you, Dr. Martin, would have said that men are not necessarily health seekers. So you wouldn't find a man going to a doctor seeking medical attention if, as long as he's walking and he's feeling comfortable. You would not find him going to a doctor or getting any kind of advice and so forth. And of course, we hear a lot about COVID and how it affects individuals who have comorbidities. Okay, so let's keep our fingers crossed. Just going on to something else, as it relates to sex and sexuality, sexual health. Now, whenever you talk to any man in Grenada, his power, his virility, his manhood is placed on his erection. Okay, and Dr. Martin, I'll come back to you again, and then I'll get some comments from Dr. Leo and Shane. Has COVID affected men and their sexual health?
Well, the truth is, the research that I've done so far, and from the pathophysiology of what COVID does, initially we thought COVID was a respiratory illness, and that was correct to a certain extent. That was a time when the world chose to look at ventilators to saving people's lives. But then we found that ventilators were actually, people who were on ventilators were actually dying. And that made us look closer at really why they died. And then we found out that they were dying from DIC, means disseminated intravascular coagulation. And what that meant was that disseminated means that we had issues all over the body. Intravascular means that it was happening inside the vascular system or the blood vessel system. And coagulation simply means it was multiple blood clots. And what they found was that multiple organ failure happened because there were multiple blood clots in the blood vessels leading to those organs. So that meant that COVID was not only just a respiratory illness, but it was a vascular illness, meaning that it causes blood clots in the organs that were important for human function. And so it is now normal to expect that people who infected with COVID are going to have problems with the liver, the kidney, the spleen, the heart, and other very important organs in their bodies. As a result of this, investigators were able to look at, we didn't look at it in Grenada, but investigators were able to look at what happens, because in a man, erection happens because there is good blood supply to his penis. Now, if there isn't good blood supply to a man's penis, he has issues with erection, sustaining erections and ejaculations. And what they found was that because COVID interferes with the internal lining of the blood vessels, and I want to take a note here, a blood vessel is like a PVC pipe. The PVC pipe has an inner lining and an outer lining. The inner lining, where the blood actually flows, that's the area that seems it's called that's the area that COVID seems to affect. It's similar to diabetes, where it affects the inner lining of the blood vessels. Cholesterol does the same thing as well. It turns out that COVID actually interferes and makes that inner lining of the blood vessels problematic. And because a man's erection has to do with good blood supply to his penis, multiple papers have reported that there are men who are infected with COVID infection has multiple or probable or even extended erectile dysfunction after being infected with COVID. So not only are men going to be affected with the psychological aspect of being isolated, quarantined, but men will actually have problems with their erection post-COVID. And that's going to be another significant issue that we as men have to deal with in the post-COVID era. Over.
All right, thank you very much, Doc. Dr. Leo, put that into perspective for us in that psychological context.
Yeah, sure, because certainly I cannot speak to the biology of COVID on the body, but what I can speak to based on my experience and expertise is that when individuals are stressed or they're dealing with anxiety, because those are different, and are depressed, it can have an impact on their libido. They have low libido, so you don't feel like engaging in sex because you just don't have the capacity to do so. In addition, other symptoms is you can feel very tired. Your sleep hygiene can be disrupted. So I think those practical things like your sleep hygiene's interrupted, perhaps you're not eating healthy enough or the kinds of food that you should. I suspect all of these, and having a full mind, sort of think about it as real estate. If your mind is consumed with stress and worry and anxiety, perhaps you don't have, or you might be challenged to engage in sexual intercourse and feel that deep, intimate connection because your head is full. And I suspect, given the symptoms of anxiety and depression and stress, that those can have an impact on people's ability to engage in coitus.
Okay, Shane.
I think what I'm hearing and appreciating is the importance and the value of both the biological response, as Dr. Martin has so eloquently given. The reality is that from a biological perspective, things ain't looking good, or things will not be looking as good. So as it relates to erectile dysfunctionality, maintaining that level of manhood and so forth, you know, there's the biological pieces. And I think Dr. Leo has summed it up well from the psychosocial and the psychological responses we're seeing here about people's response as a result. So if we combine both, what this is telling us, as so eloquently given by both doctors, is that we're seeing here the biological, the psychosocial, the emotional. It means that, Mr. Pierre, the whole man needs to be taken care of, because all aspect of his health, which inevitably affects his mental health, that affects his overall health, we need to address that. And I think that's why we have in this discussion, because I would like to concur that both aspects are affected, and it speaks to the manifestation of those challenges in different ways. It's deep.
It's deep. It's pretty deep. And with all of that going on, with the issues of COVID and what it can do, and the short and long-term effects, we have the issues of vaccination. Now, we have a lot of theories, we have a lot of conspiracies, we have a lot of issues surrounding vaccination. Right? Men are saying, you know, they're not willing to take that vaccine because it would affect the function, it would affect the erection. Dr. Martin, I'm coming back to you. What's the scenario? What's the story behind vaccination and sexual performance for men?
I have heard that before. I I have heard that guys been worried and scared about vaccination and sexual performance and infertility. But what I needed to encourage men to think is that there are men who can't have any children. There are men who have problems with infertility. And we do semen analysis or sperm analysis to determine why they can't have children. And one of the things we do is to look at the semen or the sperm under the microscope to ensure or to look as to why they can't have children or the sperm is not viable. And one of the things we look at is the presence of white blood cells. White blood cells are our army or defense mechanism to protect us from infections. So white blood cells, all they do is kill people. Or sorry, Arthur, not kill people. White blood cell kills things or
Right.
virus, bacteria, right? As opposed to red blood cells that makes us have good oxygen and so on and so forth. Now, white blood cells is not good for sperm because white blood cells, all they do is kill things. Now, when we look at the semen analysis of men, one of the things a lab technician looks at is the presence of white blood cells in the semen. And if the lab technician finds white blood cells in the semen, that means that man will never be able to impregnate anybody because white blood cells kills things. And so the white blood cell is going to kill the sperm. So this is what men need to understand. Now, vaccines and COVID, to a certain extent, works in the white blood cells. So if the vaccine has to work, it has to work in the white blood cells. And if you want to drill down even further, not just the white blood cells, but the leukocytes of the white blood cells. Leukocytes are specialized blood cells within the white blood cell family that helps to fight against viruses. That's where the vaccines work. So these vaccines work in the leukocytes within the white blood cell family that is far removed and should actually be removed from the production of sperm. So the vaccine does not work, or the vaccine should never work in the area where sperm is being produced. So men need to be reassured that if you take a vaccine, it does not interfere with your fertility. In other words, if the vaccines interfere with your fertility, then that means that your white blood cells was killing your sperm all along anyway. So it was not the vaccine that made you infertile. You were infertile from the beginning. And I really hope that you guys tonight understand where I'm coming from. Over.
Very well. Yes, I think I got that clearly. But now the whole issue of anxiety. I want us to sort of put into context what exactly is anxiety. And based on all the things that's happening with the issues of COVID, with the issues of vaccine, with the decision to take vaccine or not, with all the arguments that we hear and we see, with all the things that might be happening, men who have recovered from COVID, and now are having all sort of little side effects, all sort of little residual effects of COVID, there might be issues of anxiety. Define for me the issue of anxiety and how do we deal with it? I know that we cannot all give a one pill kind of story to it, but how do we begin to peel away at some of the issues of anxiety surrounding the effects of COVID, the effects of vaccination, or the perceptions that might be out there?
Thanks, Arthur. Before I define anxiety, I wonder if I can talk a little bit about following what Dr. Martins mentioned.
Sure. Feel free, go right ahead.
From a psychological perspective, because I thought it was a great contribution he gave. So I think a lot of folks, so first off, some individuals who are hesitant about taking vaccination, I don't think they're anti-vaxxers. I think it's coming from a very reasonable place.
Right.
Often in psychology, we have this thing that we call cognitive dissonance, which really is where when people have a mental discomfort that results in holding two conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes.
Mhm.
You see, as humans, we're very ritual based. We like to predict things in terms of attitudes and perception. And so when you have this issue of a vaccination, which might be inconsistent to what people believe, then they would try to rationalize, to sort of remain in control, rationalize why they probably should not or should take a vaccine. And I think with a lot of folks who may be engaging in like vaccine conspiracy, it is based on this mental discomfort, this idea of wanting to sort of make sense of that mental discomfort that they're experiencing. And the mental discomfort, I think, is reinforced through things like forced compliance and through things like new information. And so I think as a community and as a population, we have to be really compassionate and really gentle to recognize that for some, it may take some time to come around to sort of quiet the mental discomfort that they may be experiencing. To answer your question about anxiety, anxiety and stress is two very different things. Anxiety is our body's natural reaction to either protect us or compel us to do things. For example, if I turn my stove on, I probably will be anxious to touch it because I'm going to get burned. Anxiety, often it is sometimes difficult as opposed to stress, which is more short-term, and you could identify typically what's causing stress. I'm stressed out here because I can't pay the bill. Anxiety is a natural reaction in our body, but for some individuals, it can become problematic anxiety if it is beyond what is expected. So there's an ABC. It affects your behavior. So A is for affect, the B is behavior, and the C is cognition. And so anxiety, problematic anxiety, is when you are prevented from moving forward, or you're running away, or flight type of response to a situation that you think you cannot deal with.
Okay, very well. I'm looking for Shane's take on the whole matter. I really I wanted to talk, and I will come back to it. I think you mentioned it, the issue of mandatory vaccination, and it is something that can create some issues. So I'll come to that as soon as Shane give me his comments.
Oh, my contribution to this particular discussion is certainly staying in my lane with regards to the psychological and the response from that perspective. And I think I very much value the pieces that Dr. Martin has given, and I certainly add with what Dr. Leo has stated, that that anxiety is really that emotion that is characterized by the changes that happen in our tension, in our worrying thoughts, and that is oftentimes exacerbated by the increase in blood pressure, which goes back to what Dr. Martin was talking about. And I think that when we hear that persons have been diagnosed with those kinds of recurring intrusive thoughts, it really tells us that persons are now beginning to be in a place whereby the anxiety, which is the response, and then the stress comes in, and we start saying, oh God, what would happen, this, that, and the other. And I can understand very well where some persons are coming from. And I think Dr. Leo talk about the hesitancy, and we talk about the reluctance. And I'm not here to be in a place whereby there's so many schools of thoughts. Am I one of those who support the vaccination? Yes, I am. I am one of those who be able to say to us that we're going to really put facts over fiction. We're really going to be putting the empirical data and evidence over people's own opinion and assertions. And as a result, if we do that, I think that in itself will lower our anxiety and our stress level.
Sorry, Arthur.
Go ahead.
Just off the back, because I think I probably should have explained it a bit more. So although it's a natural response in your body, If you feel though that you're worrying too much and it's interfering with your work, your relationship, and other parts of your life, then you need to talk to a professional person. If fear and your worry and your anxiety is upsetting and it becomes too difficult to control, then that's an issue as well. And if you think your anxiety could be linked to some other physical health problem, then perhaps it would make sense to follow up to see a professional. So what I'm saying really is that if you have 2 or 3 days where you feel really under the weather, that is normal. That there's nothing to be incredibly conscious about. But if it continues in duration and intensity, then that is a concern.
Very well. Now, let's look at a typical Grenadian man. He knows that he's under pressure. He's silent about it. He doesn't speak a word. He knows that he can't really get to the rum shop or even get a weed to smoke or get a release for want of a better word, from his outside woman. So he is there, and he is struggling. How do we deal with something like that? He's not going and get vaccinated. He's not going and get tested. He is just stewing, really and truly, in the issues that confronts him. There is no group. There is nobody that he feels that he could really talk to. Really and truly, when you sit and you talk to men, they are almost like if they are in a trap. Okay, they would go on the blocks or they would go in the bar and they would talk about everything else. Right? They get an opportunity to sit down on the blocks and talk, but they would talk about everything else than how they feel and what they're actually going through. How do we begin to deal with this in this sort of cultural context on the stage called Grenada?
Arthur, can I contribute?
Sure, go right ahead, Doc.
Yeah. Arthur, the person that you have just described will always be in a group. It may not be a group that you recognize, but they will always be in a group. It might be a group of fishermen, a group of guys on the block, if you want to put it that way, a group of rum men, if you want to put it that way, or a group of ganja smokers. They will always be in a group. Men, I mean, as far as we think men are not social beings, but we are social. Men always isolate with some group of people that we did. So I think, in answer to your question, for those individuals, what we need to do is to find the group that they're associated with and engage that group. Over.
All right. Dr. Leo.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I think finding the social group and engaging, because they have to be able to have that connection. I think though, perhaps the resistance in seeking support is stemmed with the stigma that may surround reaching out for help, because men are the pillar, or are considered to be the pillar. Don't want to appear weak. Don't want to appear like you don't have your stuff together. So I think it's about, as much as we can, normalizing the experience that, much like the weather, so in Grenada, rain falls and the sun shines from the sky, and when it's hurricane season, lightning and all that good stuff, but the sky stays, the sky is unchanging. And the same with us as human beings, as a man, that you can have emotions, some that are pleasant, some that are unpleasant, some that may appear to be soft, like feeling like you're vulnerable and want to cry and sad and all of that. But I think part of it is really normalizing those conversations, and I think it is the responsibility that moves beyond men, that all of us in society collectively have a responsibility to create an environment where men can feel like they can reach out for support and in whatever context work for them, be it the rum shop, be it with folks who smoke the good marijuana, however they choose to distress and connect, I think it's important. But that can only be done. Well, not can only be done, but perhaps will be done much easier if it's normalized.
Very well, very well. Shane.
I concur with what have already been said.
Okay. So really and truly, we find the groups and we begin to change the narrative of those groups to really and truly include the discussion and really open the discussion so that men can begin to feel safe in that space to talk and to express themselves. Very well.
Safe and brave, because I think safe is fine, because safe is it being a supportive space, but
Right.
will call for this vulnerability, stepping out when it even feels difficult. So not just creating safe space, but spaces that are brave as well. So these men can be men and be human. So be vulnerable and embrace whatever emotion shows up.
Very well. Just to talk a little bit about the man-to-man experience that I've had. You have guys come in there and they clam up. They don't really want to talk. And as soon as you break that ice, you realize that you can't keep them, you can't shut them up for any length, for any period of time. Okay, so of course we have to get that space and we have to get those things coming out. Men have to be brave. I want to talk about just touch a little bit about the issue of mandatory vaccination. I think, Dr. Lee, you just slightly mentioned it. And how do you think that might affect our men folk, especially if the issues of vaccination is attached to jobs and so, whether or not, they can, if you don't get vaccines, I think a number of countries across the Caribbean, even here in some businesses, they're saying, if you're not vaccinated, you will not be allowed to continue your job. So you're looking at men who, they depend. They perceive themselves to be the breadwinners. They are the breadwinners in some cases, and they are now there is now the challenge of and the debate of whether they should take the vaccine or not, and now their jobs are threatened. How do we try to get around that sort of issue? Any takers?
All right. So that's a good question. I have my politics on vaccination. I am vaccinated. I think it makes sense to get the vaccine. I have a problem though with this, I guess, heavy hand approach. I think though some things are in our control, some things are out of our control, and so a way to manage and deal with this vaccination mandate is to think about what is in your control. In my control, I can either choose to get vaccinated or not. And if I don't, the consequences of that. And if I do, the consequences of that as well. And what is out of my control is what our government decide. So that's the first thing that I think it's important to think about. In reference though to the forced compliance that I talk about, sometimes people might find themselves engaging in behaviors that are opposed to their own beliefs due to external expectation. So even if someone may want to get it, if the expectation for work, school, or social situation say you have to, some human beings, because we're just wired differently, sort of will go to this place of resistance. So I don't know if there's an answer to this, except for it is for people make their choice to figure out what they can control, what they can't. And if they are engaging in cognitive dissonance, which is what I talk about, this mental discomfort due to this two conflicting ideas, I think then it's important to seek out additional information. If I can sort of draw from example, the hospital that I work at, vaccine became mandatory, and a large number of staff who are not vaccinated and who will be laid off from the 19th happen to be Black workers. Mm-hmm. So what the hospital did is the hospital brought in a number of medical doctors who are also Black to talk to Black staff about the vaccination. And we recognize that very planned reaction, 85% of the, 75% of the Black staff who were scheduled to be laid off got vaccinated. I think it's about really getting your information from people who you trust and from sources that are reputable, rather than on TikTok or on all these things that get, because that just reinforces the mental discomfort. But I think it's a very subjective experience.
Excellent. I like that idea. Shane?
I think that, you know, I'm in a space where the experiences are similar. And what we have done is to use a number of persons who are coming from evidence-based piece knowledge, lived experiences, to be able to talk and share experience, and certainly to be able to deal with the facts, deal with the research, deal with the data, and deal with those pieces that are real, so that we can really begin to deal with the apprehensions, the uncertainties, and those pieces that are causing those stress within the lives of persons who are within that state of uncertainty. So I believe that, it's tough, Arthur, it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough.
And I think, you know, the analogy that we have heard is that we're seeing in some regards, some things we have control over. And I know many persons, even after they will look at this video, it would be like, yeah, but they have no control over me. But there are some things that you have, you know, but if there is no control, there are consequences, and certainly looking at, you know, those perspectives along that line. So it's a tough piece, but I would like to say to people to look at it, review it, evaluate it, and begin to really base their decision on the facts and not the opinions of just persons who do not have the facts.
Right. I know Dr. Martin has done quite a lot within even last year and this year, trying to talk persons into vaccination, trying to explain all the intricacies. I know that he loves research. So, Doc, let me hear your take.
Arthur, what I'm going to say to you, I hope you're going to take it into consideration. Arthur, do you know that the reason why the Caribbean region and the Latin American countries can boast that we have eliminated measles, mumps, and rubella, it is because that these vaccines has found their way into the legislation. Don't know if you know that, but that's the reason. I mean, every child that goes to a primary school up to secondary school has to be vaccinated against measles, mumps, and rubella.
From pre-primary.
Pre-primary. And the reason is because these vaccines has found themselves into the legislation. Secondly, TB. Anybody who is diagnosed as having tuberculosis must be treated. A tuberculosis person cannot say that they don't want the treatment. In other words, you can arrest a tuberculosis person, put them in jail, and the doctor can actually go and give them the treatment. So in other words, public health safety has always trumped people's personal liberties. That is how we in the Latin American countries and the Caribbean has been able to say that we do not have measles, mumps, and rubella. That is why our conversation these days does not include measles, mumps, and rubella, because we have been the first region in the world that has eliminated measles, mumps, and rubella. And I think because of this, the public health response is that for public health safety, there must be some kind of mandatory requirement. I don't like mandatory requirement. Let's get this clear. I don't think anything should be mandatory. But it seems to me that human beings will always resist unless there is a mandatory issue. So while I do not like the mandatory response to the COVID vaccine, from a public health standpoint and from a public health protection standpoint, it seems as though there must be some kind of force or pressure to people to protect themselves, because maybe I'm not wrong, but maybe human beings are prone to destroying themselves. I don't know. We can discuss it all night long.
I want to thank you very much. I don't know if you finished, Doc. Thank you very much. I want to bring up a little bit of issue here that might be a little bit controversial, and certainly might be a topic, a white elephant that sometimes we don't want to address. But I want to hear your take on it. Okay. The issue of religion. The issue of religion as it relates to COVID and as it relates to vaccines. We have lost a number of our comrades, our brothers and sisters who are Christians. And of course, you would know that Grenada is a Christian society. We profess Christianity. And there are some principles, there are some things that we adhere to as it relates to religion. Now, the issue of vaccination, the issue of COVID, sometimes have raised the religious eyebrows, so to speak, and there have been various debates over that. Also, when we come to religion, we come to issues of church. How do we get some sort of balance as it relates to that, religion, vaccination, and what do you think the religious community can do to assist men in resolving some of the issues, COVID-related and social-related in this particular time? Any takers?
I hope you're hearing me.
Loud and clear.
Listen to me. This issue of the religion and the way they behave is a very serious matter. Religion has found a way to describe this issue, and to a certain extent, religious leaders have found a way to describe this issue as a issue of mark of the beast. Now, that can be a very serious matter when it comes to compliance to this, because I know how religions feel about the mark of the beast. I have no evidence, I have no conviction that this is the mark of the beast, but religious organizations need to be engaged on this matter, because trust me, if we don't engage religious leaders to understanding that this is not the mark of the beast, then of course it's going to be a big issue. So I would rest my case by saying we need to engage religious leaders on this matter.
Very well.
I agree 100%, and I'll be very brief on this religious thing because I'm not terribly religious at all. I think though religion is very pervasive in the islands, in Grenada in particular. I think religion and religious leaders have a real influence on the Grenadian community. I think then there is a responsibility of those communities to speak the truth and to really be clear that this is not the mark of the beast and people are not doomed for hell, etc., etc. I think as well, although I'm not holding my breath, because religion as well is responsible for a number of folks sitting in the pew, depressed and anxious, with a Bible in their lap, because they feel they cannot talk to anyone else. And I mean, faith and spirituality is great as a way to diffuse. If you want to pray, that's great. I'm not holding my breath. I think a lot of our religious leaders can do much better. I think they have a responsibility to do better, but unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath.
Okay.
And I think because we have had this discussion on so many pieces, and I'm not gonna add much more to what Dr. Martin and Dr. Leo have said, but I go on the same biblical principles that you have talked about, that to whom much is given, much more is required. And we need to be able to take that in its context to understand when that was spoken, why it was spoken, and even those, when we look at it, even by virtue, and I wrote that down when you said it, Grenada is a, is a Christian community, and that in itself is a problematic piece on many levels, because we see the convenience, we see the appropriation and misappropriation of it for its own use and intent and purposes. And I'm thinking that, as Dr. Martin rightly said, I cannot support the myth that this is the mark of the beast, and this is what is going to drive people into the direction of hell. And certainly, I think we need a lot more, not just education and not just understanding, but I think when I said to whom much is given, a lot is placed upon the persons who are in those positions and in those roles to really take the mantle upon, just as would have been done in other situations, to be able to present the truth and the whole truth and nothing
but the truth. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. I think we could go on for the whole night. I like the discussion. I like the discourse, but all good things must come to an end. But just before we leave, just two things. One, we spoke about the issues of mental health. We spoke about issues of sexuality. We spoke about COVID and how it affects the man, right? The male gender, the issues of sex and how it affects your sexuality. And so we also spoke about COVID and religion. Just before we leave, I would want persons to give some very short tidbits of advice for our menfolk as we go through this period of the pandemic, one, and two, some closing remarks. Who's going to go first?
Well, I can start by saying that in this times that we're living in, that if now more than ever, we have not been in a place whereby men need men. And I know that might have many connotations in it, but take it for what it means. It's an opportunity for men to be able to reach other men, for men to be able to be there to support other men. And I think it's an opportunity as well for intentional conversation and dialogue, and for us to be able to move away from a number of the pieces around the taboo and realize that men are being impacted, men are affected, and certainly we must. It is imperative that we begin to address this. If not, we are aware of the consequences. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be within this space with my esteemed colleagues to share, and certainly to be able to engage on such a meaningful and such an important topic in this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Shane. May you continue the hard work. We cannot miss you in Grenada, so let's bless up and big up. All right, stay good, stay healthy, stay strong. Dr. Leo. Sorry, Dr. Martin, go right ahead.
And for me, Shane, I want to continue by saying that for men, especially in our part of the world, cardiovascular issue is the biggest issue. We die more from heart disease and heart attack than women. And that's because we suffer from more cardiovascular disease than women. And as a result, men suffer from more erectile dysfunction than women. So I want to encourage men to take care of themselves, eat good, do what they need to do, protect themselves from COVID, because we have ample evidence that COVID causes erectile dysfunction, which can bring on a lot more psychosocial and emotional issues that can really dig into the emotional stability of a man. And I really want to protect men from this. So I really want men to consider protecting themselves by following the measures and vaccinating to protect themselves from getting COVID. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. Thank you very much for your discourse, for all the bits and clarity, bits and pieces of advice, and really explaining to us some of the physiological issues as it relates to COVID. Thank you so very much. Dr. Leo.
Thank you, Arthur. I would like to encourage men, big and small, masculine and feminine, to hold all their emotions as they come, sadness, happiness, whatever it is. I would like to encourage them to really pay attention to their mental health as they will to their physical health, to stay active, sleep when they can, eat properly, and to just really take care of themselves. Because self-care is not about self-indulgence, it is about self-preservation, and that in itself is a political act. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Leo, for really putting some of the psychological and mental health issues into perspective for us as it relates to COVID and our men's health. Gentlemen, it has been a very, very good discourses this evening. I know that I learned quite a lot, okay, and there's certainly a lot to be done among our men folk. I think each of you put those issues into perspective. Certainly, I don't think that this is our last bit of discussion, because we will continue to have discourse like this. So I look forward to hearing from you in not too distant future as we kind of, educate our men folk and educate our public as to the issues that are affecting men. Continue doing your hard work. Please continue to stay safe. Continue really working towards the, building our men folk, building our the male capacity, and really advancing the cause of men, well, from where you are, and certainly for us here in Grenada. All right, so I want to express really heartfelt thanks to Dr. Leo, Dr. Martin, to Shane, and to Grenchap for putting this together. I felt honored to be a host this afternoon, and I look forward for further discussions and dialogue as we deal with some of the issues affecting men. Thank you so very much, and have a blessed one.